The rushing winds of that frigid winter caused a deathly coat of white to cover the lands. This snowstorm drove out even the most resilient animals from the region, and caused the very small hunting tribe of yokel strength, a group of about 50 frost giants native to the land, to descend from their mountain hunting grounds. They began hunting the more delectable people, the Gammons, yeti-like humanoids that had built villages not too far to the east. These villages, under attack by the starving hunters, were desperate and sending more and more refugees to the central city of Frenzyfern that was run as a theocracy. The head of the theocracy was a man known simply as the Bishop. He and his disciples prayed to the old gods for an answer to his people's plight. The only answer they received was one of the older disciples falling dead in prayer from fasting and extreme cold. After days of having the silent god stare down on him, a new voice whispered in the back of his mind. Only a bare mumbling drove the bishop, exhausted from countless nights of calling to his gods, to follow these whispers towards the nearby woods. Stumbling in the dark, he nearly fell down a huge pit in the earth. Clambering back, he couldn't get the final audible words of the strange voice out of his mind.
Go below.
As the Gammons grew more desperate, not far to the west, a single rat-like creature burrowed its way into the light of the surface. Having lived far beneath the soil, the lemmings had lived a peaceful communal life of eating bugs and enjoying the warmth of the earth far below. That was, until very recently, the warmth all but disappeared, the caverns becoming an icy tomb for those that would not travel above. Finally reaching the surface, these lemmings, having had no natural predators, greeted the large humanoids that were towering above the trees. Their first lesson learned on the surface world was that it was only going to get worse from here, and so they began doing what they did best, creating huge stacks of metal, only previously used as support beams in their tunnels, now used to support their massive metal walls. The best tunnelers seen in the land, they dug a massive moat and slowly spread their defensive walls across the mountainside over the next several months, erecting over 50 metal mines with immense income. As these towering walls spread, the chieftain of yokel strength had passed away in his sleep, and the next yokel, guardian of the younglings, had to be chosen to guide the tribe and ensure the younglings, who had yet to grow their invulnerability to the cold, were kept warm and well fed. Two of the burliest giants, the great Borsalak hunter of beasts large and small, and Gorlak, strong elder fire tender, had an argument during a hunting party about being the next chieftain. "I is the best hunter since my youngling years, even got this great axe from the chieftain himself for it. I know how to hunt the most gnarliest beasties. All you'll do is sit in the corner and twiddle your wee sticks." He laughed heartily, joined by the other two frost giants that agreed with his leadership. "The younglings won't last a year with you as guardian, you cow. They'll freeze to death in their cribs as you stuff their mouths with frozen treats. I'll make sure every youngling grows with fire in their blood and the call to hunt pumping in their hearts. Not only don't you know how to start a fire, you barely even understand our traditions." The arguing grew to a head as the frost giants and their compatriots drew their weapons, but was interrupted by the scout, Jessafar the coward, a scrawnier frost giant who was known as the worst hunter among them. He came gasping up the cliff, covered in snow. "There's a really, it's so, He just kept gesturing over the hill with an exasperated look on his face, gasping for air like a youngling. This hilarious display of weakness made all four of the other giants laugh at him. As they were laughing and mocking Jessafar, a huge creature approached from behind. Jessafar pointed, eyes widening. It's a, out here, lad, we haven't got all day." The creature lunged. "Saberwolf!" He screamed as the starving creature mawed at the exposed jugular of Gorlak. Borsalak swung wide at the creature as it finished tearing out Gorlak's throat, but little did he know yet another saber wolf was just behind him. Jessafar lifted a javelin and threw it at the creature, throwing so poorly it stabbed into the chest of a frost giant beside it. "Sorry!" All but Borsalak and the two saber wolves remained. The first he struck down with a mighty swing, but he couldn't stop the other from clawing into his chest. Borsalak grabbed it with his bare hands and snapped its neck. Choking on his own blood, he looked at Jessafar and fell on the ground. Jessafar knew it was all his fault for not warning them sooner. He heard the other half of the hunting party coming to investigate the noise. Thinking quickly, he grabbed the battle axe and pulled the saber tooth out of Borsalak's arm. "What happened here?" Jessafar, casually leaning on the axe, responded. "I bested all 5 of these giants for the position of chieftain. Even killed these saber tooths on my way back to feed the younglings." The giants looked incredulously at him. Jessafar the coward beating the 2 strongest frost giants in the tribe for position of chieftain? "Prove it then." Jessafar lifted up his hands with the wolf's saber-tooth. "A true chieftain, eh? Not like we haven't any other options." They laughed heartily, hungrily staring at the fresh meat he offered. "You are now Jessafar Saber Killer." As Jessafar celebrated his ill gains, the winter transitioned into a colder spring. The bishop ordered his people to search down in the caverns below. Lining the caves was a stench of rot, and the deeper the scouting party descended, the colder it became, piercing into their very souls over the next 3 days. One scout heard a voice calling for him from deeper in the cave. Finding blood lining a wall, he worried that it was a wounded member of his party. Quickly descending and calling out for them, no voice replied. Just the echoes of his own. His torch suddenly gusted with wind from an unknown source and flickered. The scout realized that the entrance he came from was now a flat wall. Confused, the lost scout became increasingly worried, trying to find his way out of this underground maze. None of the walls were familiar, and his torch was running out of light. Panicked, he crawled on his hands and knees up a cave shaft, and upon reaching the top found a source of firelight flickering just down the passage of the cave. Relieved, he approached the fire and called out to who was there. Raising his hand in greeting, he approached and saw them all motionlessly staring at a torch on the ground. The group simultaneously twisted their heads to look at him, and he noticed their eyes, filled with black vines covered in thorns. He screamed as the torchlight flickered out. The desperate bishop, having no return from his scouting party, reached the edge of his sanity. He ordered his disciples to allow him to pray alone to his unresponsive gods. As he prayed, he felt his worn and frozen hands pricked by a black thorn growing from the earth. To his amazement, as his blood dropped onto the vine, it grew into a beautiful black rose. Is this a sign? My gods, have you finally sent me a sign?
No.
A deep and ancient voice whispered into his head.
Something much more powerful.
The bishop, startled, fell back. What are you? The voice in his mind, with a soothing whisper, said,
Name me. Bring me forth.
And so, the desperate bishop, after a few minutes of hesitation, opened his mouth and uttered its name. The same night, the bishop sent his disciples and armed guards into the refugee campsites now littered throughout the poorer neighborhoods of his city, and had them capture 44 people. One of these families, a mother named Goli, her husband Artie, and their daughter, were intercepted by 2 of these guards. The first guard grabbed Artie, but the second, Barlin, a family friend, hid the mother and her daughter and denied anyone else was living there. As the 44 were brought to the bishop, he had them ceremoniously laid out on the floor of the temple. He ordered his men in unison to slit their throats at these sacrifices, and the men, blinded by his authority, obliged. Blood pooled on the floor, collecting together on a single tile. The bishop took a sword and with surprising strength pried the tile out of the ground, which appeared to have black vines growing from it. He collected the tablet and began studying the cursed writing upon it, reaffirming to his horrified followers that their problems were now solved. The following day, the guard at Barlin, traumatized by what he saw, told Goli everything about how her husband died. The bishop was told in his mind from his new god that a woman who would lead to the bishop's death had escaped and sent his soldiers to find Goli and kill her. But they found she had ran from her house and into the freezing wilderness. Goli and her crying baby were found by Jessafar the saber killer in the woods. The frost giant apologized to them, saying he never much liked hunting the talking animals, and wouldn't if it wasn't for their own hungry younglings. But Goli shouted that she could help them. Curious, Jessafar followed Goli into the woods as she showed him one of the few remaining walking carpets, a species of incredibly dense herbivores. Jessafar lifted his spear, knowing they would be an easy catch, as they never even acknowledged predators hunting them. But Goli lowered it and showed, walking up to the burly animal, how to milk it. The astonished Jessafar took her and the animal back to his tribe, and to ensure no one thought of Goli or her youngling as a snack, caged them inside the youngling's room. Jessafar Saber Killer, the milk bringer! The frost giants cheered. Goli over the next month learned more and more of the giants and their kin, and taught Jessafar the knowledge of her people, like how to make weapons as the old chieftain did from bone, and how to craft medicine from the wild herbs. Jessafar slowly gained more and more titles until his name became so long he was just renamed Jessafar the Many-Titled. Goli regained her freedom and walked about the territory. With rage still burning in her heart, she convinced Jessafar she would no longer help him unless he freed her people and killed the bishop. Jessafar the Many-Titled, now good friends with his small helper, promised he would bring the bishop to justice and avenge Artie. The Liberation Assassination, as it would later be called, began with Goli convincing Barlin to let her and the frost giants into the town. So corrupted with power was the bishop that the townspeople kept silent the frost giants' arrival and led them straight to the tyrannical dictator. Up alone in his temple on the hill, the bishop spoke to the ancient voice and knew his own people had betrayed him. The giants ripped open the gates of the temple.
The woman you let escape now leads to your death.
The giants climbed the hill to the temple doors. How do I escape my fate? He cried. The giants tore out the tree just outside.
Wear my mark. Use the tablets.
The bishop lifted the tablet and inscribed his name at the bottom of it. Using the tree, the giants battered down the oak doors. They saw a lone Gamma standing there, just in the center of the temple. Well, this should be easy. The bishop smiled and opened his mouth, revealing a flurry of vines erupting from his throat. The giant screamed as he was pierced by several of them. The black trails of death whipped back to their host, and the bishop wiped his mouth.
Never to join us below.
The giants bellowed a war cry and charged the bishop, as thorns erupted beneath his fingernails and these dried vines pinned multiple to the ground. Jessafar got the upper hand and grabbed the bishop by his head, slamming him into the tiled floor. The bishop's arms reached up, and vines grew beneath Jessafar's skin. Cut it off! Cut it off! You tell him, Jessafar! Ha-ha! The arm, you fool! A frost giant sliced through the arm, and Jessafar, tearing his battle axe through both arm and bishop, cut the bishop in half. Black vines erupted from his torso as he weakly backed away towards the temple window.
You will never escape us. In the end, we are always there. Death.
At the end of it all, after the bishop was buried, the townspeople freed, and the frost giants made an uneasy truce, Gully never did believe that her husband's killer was truly dead. So Gully, on that humid summer night, not but a week after the Liberation assassination, desecrated the bishop's grave. And what she saw there made her cry of despair even be heard deep, deep below. Sorry! Sorry! All but Borsalak and the... Sorry! 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 Sorry!